Good morning, everyone. We are back for another Best Ball Mania stream here on Underdog Fantasy from Occupy Fantasy. I'm going to be drafting today. I am Chris, as not as always, but recently it seems like always, joined by Occupy Fantasy CEO, co-founder Brian Jester. Brian, how are you this morning?
No, that's an accurate description, dude. I feel like I've done like 40 videos in the past 3 days, and why not another one? So I'm glad to be
Yeah.
here with you. And as you pointed out to me before we went live, perhaps the earliest Occupy Fantasy live stream we've ever done. So groundbreaking stream here.
So before we dive into a contest, I wanted to talk about something a little different. I put a tweet out this morning about some of the ADP movement for players over the last 3 weeks since training camps have opened. And what I've been looking at basically since pulling that data, Brian, is some of my exposures I have up on the screen here, wide receivers in Best Ball Mania 4 that I've been drafting, my overall exposure through 52 teams so far. And I'm going to basically use a weird macro analogy here to get us started this morning. Brian, I'm the type of person where I'm a creature of habit. I think we all are. I have a daily pair of sneakers that I like to wear every single day, and it's starting to wear out. I've had it for about 8, 9 months, and I noticed like it's cracking and like things like that need to be replaced. So, I'm going online and I'm looking for the sneakers I have based off of the model and the design and the color and whatnot, and I'm placing an order for them. And it weirdly got me thinking about my best ball rosters. I've got Gabe Davis highlighted on the screen here. I've got a little over 20% of him through 52 drafts. Brian, I feel like I approach building my best ball rosters almost too similarly to the way that I approach, I guess, my wardrobe, right? I am in the certain range in a draft, regardless of what kind of stack I'm trying to put together. And I'm like, this is the Gabe Davis spot for me. Because looking at ADP, right around Gabe Davis, players like Jahan Dotson from the Washington Commanders or Jordan Addison from the Minnesota Vikings get drafted in a similar range here at this position. And if I look at my exposures, I've got under 2% Jahan Dotson. I've got under 4% on Jordan Addison. As I go and max this tournament and build out roughly 100 more drafts throughout the rest of this month, these are the types of things I'm starting to think about. How can I force myself to kind of get out of that habit of this is the player I always like in this range? I don't know if you've had a similar experience or not, but that was one of the things I've been thinking about.
No, first of all, great analogy. Appreciate that. So it's interesting because I'm looking at my exposures as well, and I see your highest owned or highest exposed player is 32%. And I'm looking at mine, and I'm through 70 something drafts so far, 77 teams. My highest exposed guy is 20%. And I haven't really been taking as many stands because I've been going that correlation route. And I have been wondering, is this enough? Is this enough leverage to get to if you want to win $3 million or so? And I find myself going back and forth on, is it worth, because I see some screenshots on Twitter, right? Like some dudes are, yeah, I got 50% of this guy with like $3,000 exposure of like hundreds of drafts. And there's probably a happy medium. I do feel like long term that in a field of this size, your exposure distribution is probably more optimal if you're building 150 teams in a large field best ball contest. Uh, but it's again, it's basically as we talked about last stream that we were on. There are a bunch of studies out there, and every conclusion essentially is there's not enough data to go around. So when it comes to this, there's also probably not enough data to go around. I'm just trying to make comparisons to what we
Right.
know in DFS.
The toughest thing, like you can't really get quote unquote enough exposure to quote unquote everyone. So that's sort of what I also think about the downside risk there. But I think I probably am drafting slightly suboptimally if I look at some of these tiers in different rounds in ADP. And if I start to highlight, okay, these are the players that I'm definitely clicking on. I don't want to say too much in different ranges, but maybe it's just a little bit of a key to my own leans that I need to maybe like pull back on a little bit and just try to diversify a little bit more and try to get a little more in line with that 8% base rate exposure to some of these definitely like top 100 players. I think top 100 players are kind of safely seen as the best assets to be exposed to, right?
Yeah, I think so. And just looking at the guys you mentioned, right? So Gabe Davis, Jordan Addison, and Jahan Dotson. So for me, I have 18% Addison, which is still plus 10% is leverage, if you want to say, right? Which I think is probably a good range for best ball contests. Gabe Davis, I'm at 11.5%, almost 12%, and then Dotson, I'm at basically 8%. So I think you're naturally going to have some guys you like more than others. There are going to be some teams that you just want to stack more than others, and I think that's okay. So, yeah, I'm just going to say I don't know. I don't know what the right way. It really ultimately comes down to how confident you are in your projections. I know you're confident in your process. It really is how confident you are in your best ball process for those of you watching. Because for me, I'm pretty confident in my correlation building that I'm okay with this type of exposure range, and I've started to hit on guys a little more, especially. And I think really what you can do if you play some of the other smaller contests, you can get your guys in those contests as well, as opposed to trying to spread it out here in the larger contests.
We got the third overall pick here, Brian. We're just waiting for this to kick off. So that is where we're going to be drafting from this morning. I do have a lot of faith in my own projections, but I did want to cover this right before the draft gets started. I have more faith in my projections, Brian, in mid-season. I do think preseason, there are a lot of sharp people making projections that are, I would definitely say, better than me. Spending more time optimizing their projections, running a little bit more like regression analysis and stuff like that than I am. I feel like the edge I have is matchups mid-season, and that's a nice way for me to talk about the fact that we are gearing up for some of our regular season daily fantasy content that will start next month when the regular season begins. I know obviously we've got preseason that we want to focus on for the next 3 weeks here, but that is going to be quite an exciting time when we get to get that going here. Going to go with Christian McCaffrey here in the first round. I'm more than okay to take him when he is here.
Yep, easy, especially with the Cup news. Tyreek, I mean, any of these guys you can take at 3, and I think we even discussed this very scenario on the last stream. For those of you who are listening and didn't get in on the preseason action last week or a couple days ago, I mean, huge successes for our members. I know our one member got second in the big GPP for 20K. Shaking my fist at him as I finished 4th right behind him. So, but yeah, lots of big wins. And, you know, I don't think we could have started any better. Chris, your call on stream couldn't have started any better in preseason. So I know it's the best ball stream, but we're going to pat ourselves on the back a little bit there.
Yeah, look, feel like we probably will get a little bit of cross viewership on this, so not a bad thing to bring that up. Wow. Cover boy of today's stream, I'll come back to that in a second. Amon-Ra St. Brown, 7th overall. I don't hate it, Brian. I actually, in my raw projections, have him as a top 5 wide receiver this year. He's drafted as a top 5 wide receiver in this contest. He's just not typically been drafted that way. As the preseason rolls on, look, we're not going to, well, maybe we are. Maybe we're going to stay hot the entire way through, but nailing a sub 5% play like Austin Watkins, definitely we'll take it. Not going to happen every single time. What I will say is on these larger slates, which we have quite a few of them coming up next week, you will see far more popular plays in the winning lineups. So I don't think you have to get too crazy with low-owned plays, especially in those like 3-4+ game environments. But obviously more on that when we have the daily plugs come out and some of the preview videos that we'll be posting for those slates as well.
Yeah, I mean, you just set the bar way too high. Just immediately nailing a sub 5% on the very first preseason slate of the year. So to your point about Amon-Ra going 7th overall, I agree. I mean, I think there's a very clear path to him finishing as a number 1 overall wide receiver this year. So if you're making limited teams, you know, not everyone watching this is building 150 teams or 50 teams or even 20 teams. So there's some guys that you're going to have to take some shots on ahead of ADP. And if you only have 3 drafts, there's a real chance that you don't end up with a 10, 11, or 12 pick where it quote unquote makes sense to take Amon-Ra at ADP. And if you end up with 6 or 7 and you want an Amon-Ra on one of your 5 teams, I have no problem with taking him there, and you'll be a little bit different than teams who don't take him that highly.
Yeah, excellent analysis, because obviously he's not going to be there at 18, which is the second pick when you pick 7. So maybe that is what Radiner here is thinking about. Maybe he's a big Lions fan. Who knows? But not a bad player to have in the first round. A little bit different. And obviously getting those unique combos at the top of the draft board, something to consider in general, regardless of how many lineups you're putting together in this contest. I have gone back and forth on how many early running backs I want to take after reading through some of those studies from the Best Ball Data Bowl, some things we talked about all spring and summer long. I'm not against taking a second running back here after already having McCaffrey, Brian, but it just intuitively feels wrong to me. How do you feel
Yeah,
about that?
yeah. I don't know. I mean, we saw last year's Best Ball Mania winner go back-to-back running backs to start the draft. So I think if it makes sense, it makes sense. It's not something I want to force. If I'm breaking ties, I'm probably going to the receiver. What was interesting to me, and I'll let you make your pick here, but Hayden Winks, whose work we reference on these shows a lot, works for Underdog Fantasy, has access to a lot of data, put out a poll gauging the public opinion on how often uh, wide receivers end up in a best ball lineups flex spot in Best Ball Mania on Underdog Fantasy last year. And I'll admit it was a little bit lower than I expected. Obviously, it was lower than the pollsters expected as well, just 39%. So, Chris, anything to make of that data when considering positional eligibility this early in the draft?
It does challenge our preconceived notions a little bit, right? 39% lower than I thought it was going to be. Do you know I didn't see the chart. Did you get the results
Yeah, let me see.
on tight end running back? You can
Let
be
me-
roughly. All right.
I don't have a clue. I'll take a look here.
Okay. So, not super likely I will get the full pairing here, but I am going to take Mark Andrews in the third round because of some correlation value with San Francisco in semifinals week. 49ers play the Cardinals, the Ravens, and the Commanders in the fantasy playoffs. And Andrews is actually my highest exposed tight end overall. So I'm obviously adding to that here by selecting him. I don't, obviously, he has a path to being the number one scoring tight end. I don't know if he's going to be a high advance rate player or not. And we haven't talked too much about advance rate as a metric on these streams because I do think the concept of what advance rate represents is still somewhat flawed and kind of emerging as we get more data. But I do feel like in the fantasy playoffs, regardless of how we get there, the players at the tight end position that are most likely to give us the spike weeks we need to win are going to be these elite tight ends. So I do want to get a few more of these guys as I continue to build up my rosters.
Yeah, me too. Again, I'm trying to get more exposure to those guys as well, and the elite quarterbacks in that sense. So, no, I totally understand. So I actually just put up Hayden's poll here on Twitter, and it was actually not overall. It was just looking at the top 1% of teams last year in Best Ball Mania 3.
Okay,
So,
but
uh, really
that's
shrinking
still
the
a
data
really good
size here.
sample.
Yeah. So it was just wide receivers he asked about and talked about. He said 39% of top 1% of teams in any given week were wide receivers. The poll, nearly 40% of respondents said 40%, or sorry, 40% said they thought that number would be 60%. So a lot higher. And I think I probably fell in that range as well. And then he also just put out a poll last night or yesterday evening, looking at the top 1% of teams, Underdog Fantasy Best Ball Mania 3. What percent of the time were there multiple wide receiver starters from the same NFL team? So basically, stacked wide receivers. How often do they end up in the top 1% of teams? And the answer was 15%. So uh, I don't know what to make of that number, to be honest. I don't know if it should be higher or lower, but
That was my reaction too. I don't know if that's good or bad. I think we need some comparative data points. I'm sure Hayden has those. How many teams in that top 1% even had double stacked wide receivers with
right.
a quarterback, right? That's obviously one you need to have a comparison. And then obviously just the base rate of which teams were the right teams to own at the end of the season there. I still feel like double stacking is overall good. Now, maybe I'm being too influenced by, well, let me frame this question a different way. We have sort of honed in on, in the daily fantasy land, Brian, 3-1 game stacks, basically double stacking a quarterback and having a bring back. Do you find yourself doing that here in Best Ball Mania? Maybe a little bit more just because of that? Or are you not thinking about that at all as you build these rosters?
Yeah, so obviously that is something that I'm considering. And the research that we have, again, still limited, but most of the research shows that those types of game stacks are profitable, are plus EV moves in best ball tournaments. Now, we're not talking about the smaller contests, but these larger contests, getting any correlation edge that we can. We've seen that usually you want two teammates with your quarterback. There's I think the largest leverage, at least the past couple of seasons, has been having three teammates with your quarterback, and I assume that's mostly with quarterbacks with heavy volume, the highest fantasy producers, and then bringing back one or two, also a positive leverage. So really game stacking, because really, Chris, like we see some games like what was the Detroit game last year where they scored like 80 points and like 8 of the 9 players of the winning Millie Maker not lineup were in that Detroit game. Like if you get a game like that in week 17 and you have 5, 6 guys from that game, like you put yourself in a really good spot to win $3 million.
That was that was a very interesting game stack lineup at the top of the Millionaire Maker. Definitely remember that. Didn't really expect Lamar Jackson to make it back to me anyway, considering that I'm drafting next to somebody named Ravens next running back. But going to 20 piece 44 there, back to back with Jalen Hurts. I'm not sure I would have done that. I'll put it that way. Okay. What do I want to do here at pick number 46? I do think I need some wide receivers because it's getting late early at that position. And I don't know. I think I'm actually okay with passing on DeAndre Hopkins because I'm not the biggest fan of the Titans passing attack this year. I probably should have at least a little bit more Hopkins than I do, but I'm going to go Williams here, and maybe I can explain why in a couple of seconds.
I'll just say, just to that point, we're getting reports already that they're moving Mike Williams around a lot more than he's ever had in the NFL, getting reps out of the slot, which is obviously a great thing, right? That truly raises a player's floor and ceiling when they're moving around to different spots, especially in the slot. So the new OC there, Kellen Moore, we should see a vastly different offense than we've seen in the past couple of years with LA, and that really, I think it widens the range of outcomes. It really enhances the range of outcomes towards the higher end for some of these guys. And Mike Williams, I feel a lot more comfortable drafting in round 4, knowing that.
What do you think about Justin Herbert and him being drafted next to Justin Fields, Joe Burrow, Lamar Jackson? Can he compete on like a median and ceiling fantasy point projection basis with these guys? Because I do want to stack the Chargers. I'm trying to stack more Chargers than I do have. I don't have a ton of Justin Herbert, but just zooming out and thinking about comparing him and his production to some of these other quarterbacks, it does feel like this ADP is really strange.
Yeah, I think we're drafting him to be able to beat what he's done in the past. And I think, again, sharp drafters are already on top of this, but he has a chance to finish in that top tier of quarterbacks if he gets the touchdown variance to fall his way. Because if you've ever watched the game or you've been on Twitter, everyone complains about the low ADOT throws, the super safe offense. By all accounts, they're going to be airing it out this year. And he does have a super high ceiling. Like he could throw 45, 50 touchdowns. And I don't think anyone would be super shocked given his arm talent. The question obviously is in fantasy football, is he going to run enough to really get that top tier fantasy ranking? I don't know. I think it's worth finding out, to be honest.
Yeah, and that's ultimately why I went with Mike Williams the round before. I again want more exposure to some of these elite players at quarterback and tight end. I feel like they're more likely to lead us to the promised land in the fantasy playoffs. So happy to get at least one wide receiver stacked with Justin Herbert. Maybe we'll find another one shortly.
A little Quentin Johnson action in round 7, maybe.
Quentin Johnson, or what about Joshua Palmer? He's been the wide receiver 3. Some of the camp buzz has been pretty nice on Palmer over the last few days, especially for those of us who are deep in the bag following 32 beat writers, for example. Obviously, a little bit of a weighted coin there, flipping QJ versus Joshua Palmer. The costs aren't really comparable. Are you taking some of both of these guys? Do you have a preference at all, independent of ADP?
Yeah, I haven't been taking much Palmer. I think I took him a couple times early in the draft season. But, I mean, it's similar to what we talked about last stream, right, with Josh Allen, right? Like, we're trying to – it would make a ton of sense to draft Palmer as your 4th Charger. Let's say you take whether it's Keenan and Mike Will or Gerald Everett in there, like 2 of the 3 receivers and tight ends, and then you close it out with Joshua Palmer. And if there's an injury late in the season and Palmer is wide receiver 2 on one of the best offenses in the league, then that could be a differentiator. So I definitely like that. And it's a really similar situation to me.
So as this progresses, I feel like unless we get a wide receiver train here, which does happen at this point in the draft, I'm faced with this Addison, Gabe Davis, Jahan Dotson range decision that we talked about off the top of the show. And there are some reasons to consider really all of them on the roster I've built so far, Brian. We've got a week 17 correlation with the Commanders with my biggest asset that I invested in here, Christian McCaffrey. We've also got a semifinals week correlation with Gabriel Davis for the Chargers, which is a stack that I have here. And of course, who's the other one there? Jordan Addison. Addison, just a player I don't have a lot of. So Addison may be the least likely of the three for me to want to pair with this roster. Little bit of wishful thinking. I think that all three are going to be here for me. But I do think if I want to go the route of San Francisco as a secondary stack, given that Brock Purdy is still pretty reasonably priced in drafts, Dotson may be like the ideal selection here.
Yeah, I think so. Evens up your exposures a little bit. And I mean, I've seen Addison fall to round 7 in some, if not most drafts. So that's a big reason I've been scooping him. And not to discredit Addison, his camp reports have been great too. A lot of beat reporters and observers saying that he looks like the next real deal in Minnesota. And I mean, their defense could be a little questionable this year. Kirk Cousins could have to air it out. And we know rookie receivers, especially when they're drafted highly, tend to produce in the second half of the seasons at a rate that exceeds their ADP value. So, I mean, I find myself taking a lot of Addison despite Jordan Jefferson being there. And this is just my way of saying, Chris, maybe you should get a little more than 2% or 3% Addison in the future.
I have made a habit of tailing sharp people. I would put you in that category. I think I'm going to do that here. But I am, okay, Addison, not today anyway, not in this contest. Sure. Am I going to be forced here to take Walker? I mean, I feel like this is bad. Why is he still here?
Yeah, late 6s. Yeah, I would certainly take. I mean, I was having trouble pulling the trigger round 4 and round 5. Late round 6.
I think this just gives a good discussion point to one of the studies that I read through. I think it was that one by Jake Bowes that I talked about on the last show. You should eat ADP value like this when it falls. It just seems like that's really good. You're building a more unique team than really anybody else that's been drafting in the last month because you get a player around later than he should be going. Just obviously wasn't super planning on Kenneth Walker, but happy to get him at pick number 70.
No, dude, you have to. And there's some drafts in general. This applies a little more to DraftKings, I think, but I've seen it more recently with more casual players hopping in these underdog drafts where sometimes you'll get a draft, you go in with your normal plan, I'm going to maximize correlation, but then it's just one of those drafts where people are just taking all sorts of players and you're getting ADP value at every single pick. And to me, as long as you're aware of that, that's a great way to diversify your portfolio a little bit. And whether it's one way or the other, right? Whether you're used to correlation or you're used to scooping ADP values, mixing in some of the drafts of the opposite strategy is a great way to diversify. So for me, there was a draft recently where I'm still trying to get some correlated pieces, but like if every guy I'm getting after round 3 is like 10 spots of ADP value, that's a really powerful team to mix in with my other correlated teams.
And sniped on Mr. Dotson. That's all right. You know, these things happen. I still prefer that decision to take Kenneth Walker, particularly because we got a little bit of a running back run after that. I am okay with the value here on Michael Pittman, a few picks behind his ADP of 69, and a little bit more exposure to Colts Raiders in week 17 is just something in general I think I want, Brian. Thinking about late December football, that's going to be a dome environment in Indianapolis, probably going to be one of the better game environments to be invested in.
Well, you will love to hear then that my highest exposed wide receiver this year so far is Michael Pittman. And my highest dollar exposure player is Michael Pittman. So I'm not necessarily this super proponent of Michael Pittman in a situation. But to me, he's just falling too far, right? Like I've been taking him in late round 6, round 7, as you just took him here. And for me, that is too late.
Think drop in efficiency for that offense with a rookie quarterback is expected and why his price is down here. But That being said, comparing it to what they dealt with at quarterback last season, even like general, typical inefficient rookie quarterback play through the air from Anthony Richardson should probably still be better than what they had in 2022. So I'm more than okay to get a real wide receiver one with top 10, maybe top 5 fantasy wide receiver upside weekly in round 7 seems like an obvious pick. So
For sure.
I do not, and I think I'm on the wrong end of the draft board, admittedly, for this. That kind of is what happens with the kind of randomizer lottery on what slot you get. But obviously, I already have Andrews on this team, no Lamar Jackson. I think one of the things I'm going to emphasize the rest of the summer is more exposure to the Ravens passing attack, just in general. We know about Todd Monken. We know that they're going to open it up a little bit more. Lamar is going to be passing more, maybe even involving the running backs more in the passing game. How are you feeling about Ravens, I guess, running backs, especially Dobbins, who went right after my Pittman selection, someone I'm thinking about that I also don't really have a lot of so far?
I mean, just a fantastic shtick by this guy with the name Ravens next running back and then drafting J.K. Dobbins. Like, I don't know if that was intentional or just sticking to the script there, but I love that. The issue is, I think you and I touched on a little bit last stream, is we don't really know much about this J.K. Dobbins holdout. So, but by all accounts, they are going to be passing to running backs more than they ever have in this offense. So, assuming Dobbins signs soon, remember they did sign Melvin Gordon recently, Gus Edwards. I still find myself clicking on Gus Edwards a decent amount in the double-digit rounds. So, I mean, this, just long story short, this is an offense you want to invest in this year. I saw a report.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say Gus is one of my highest exposed running backs so far. My exposures are weighted towards these late round running backs a little bit more, though. Let's see here. We're on the clock. I want Cortland Sutton, but I feel like I'm going to gamble on him making it to me in the next spot because I really love the camp hype with Elijah Moore so far. Brown's moving him all over the field, super involved in what we think is going to be a high upside offense this year. So hopefully I can get what I want on the turn here.
And that's a nice little +7 ADP value there on Elijah Moore. So well done. But yeah, I think that there was a report the other day that Lamar Jackson was super frustrated. Andrews was cussing out the ref that was reffing their scrimmage, and like just visible frustration all around, despite them dominating that session, right? So it goes to show the high levels of success that they're anticipating this year. And I mean, it just wouldn't. Maybe it would shock some people, but to us listening and reading, would not shock me to come out and see them just like completely go scorched earth the first few weeks of the year as teams fail to adjust to this new Ravens offensive system.
That Ravens Dolphins championship week should be very interesting. That was a game stack that I know was very, very kind to us in the 2022 regular season. So maybe our perception is a little bit off for that reason. But man, I am definitely looking forward to Ravens Dolphins. And I do have an incentive on this roster to find a Dolphin at some point for that correlation because I already have Mr. Andrews on this roster. Cortland Sutton, week 17 matchup with the Los Angeles Chargers. So I'm already super invested in that environment. Makes a ton of sense on this team. I have a lot of Sutton on my in my portfolio, already. I don't know if the Broncos are going to be like super efficient or much better than last year with Sean Payton now involved. But relative to his cost, especially, I love Sutton compared to Jerry Jeudy. And there's even some reports now emerging that Sutton is Russ's favorite target in training camp. So you got to like that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I've tried to say this as much as I could on streams, and maybe the numbers don't justify it as much, but I just don't feel like there should be a 5-round difference in ADP between those two receivers. Jeudy, it feels bad to click him in round 4. Although I will say the round 4 is a pretty dead zone. Like, I'm not thrilled with a lot of the round 4 picks, so I kind of get it. But if we're looking at who I'd rather take, it'd be Sutton in round 9 versus Jeudy in round 4.
Jeudy and Sutton both played 15 games last season, Brian. And obviously this is like super middle IQ analysis here, but Sutton was targeted 109 times. Jeudy was targeted 100 times by this set of players. Russell Wilson, obviously some of his backups played a little bit. I can't imagine, even if they've changed the system a little bit, that it's going to drastically alter Russ's preferences. I think that's probably the base expectation. The targets for these guys are going to be pretty similar. So yeah, to your point, a 5-round difference in ADP seems like a glaring mistake, and I think the mistake is in the higher price direction. I like Judy as a player, but it seems like we're paying a little too much for him.
I agree. And just to back up my take, I do have more exposure to Sutton than Judy in my best ball mania team. So not just talking out of my ass here. Also, shout out to the Gron in the chat. It says, gentlemen, thanks again for the Watkins call on Thursday. Yeah, let's keep the hype train rolling there. So thank you, the Gron. I saw reached out to us with a screenshot on Twitter. Had a great lineup there, so congrats to you and congrats to us for that call. Chris, I gotta say, it wouldn't be a stream if I didn't bring up Zach Charbonnet, who is reportedly back in practice, and crisis avoided there because I am heavily invested in Charbonnet in every contest on every site. In every season-long experts league that I've done so far, I've got him on my team. So to see him going from out indefinitely to full practicing within like 4 days was a very welcome sight.
I have a ton of Charbonnet as well. I can obviously took Walker today. I think this is the first time I've drafted Kenneth Walker. I have been out on Walker as a asset since we started doing these streams. Admittedly, when this contest first opened, it was like right after the NFL draft and prices were still correcting. Walker was a second-round pick. Walker was routinely getting drafted around like pick 24, 25 in, I think they called it the big board, the prior iteration of a big contest pre-draft that was on here that people could enter. Obviously, his price corrected here at around 5, round 6. Maybe this drop on Walker, Brian, is some of the things that have led you and I to draft more Charbonnet. Perhaps people feel like the gap between those players isn't as wide as ADP currently suggests. Big picture, though, I mean, we saw what Kenneth Walker was capable of at the end of the season last year, especially the workload that he was given. It's definitely possible that Walker just completely pulls away from Charbonnet and is worth having this year. So while I'm overweight on Charbonnet, sounds like you are as well, I still want a little bit of Walker. I assume you want a little bit of Walker too.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm looking at my exposures here now, and let me see here. So I'm looking at guys, running backs that are being drafted in the top 10 rounds, and I'm looking at my lowest exposures. Second lowest is Kenneth Walker. I have him on just 2.6% of teams. The lowest for me, can you guess rounds 10 or higher running backs that I have the lowest exposure to?
Around 10 or higher. Let me ruminate on that while I look at making a couple of picks here, and I'll give you my answer after round 11's pick here.
Sounds good.
Okay. Brian, I don't know if you have any business you want to talk about for the channel over the next week or so. I feel like there's some announcements potentially. I'm basically obviously just trying to punt to you while I think about what I want to do.
I got you. So yeah, you guys saw the video that Chris and I did on Thursday for the preseason. I'm out for the next week or so, starting tomorrow. So what that means for the channel, Chris and maybe some of the other members of the team, Nick, Chuck, Smitty, those guys, some combination, or just Chris, we'll be putting out preseason videos Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday next week. So be on the lookout for that. If you're a UFC fan, you watch our channel for UFC videos. I did put one out last night for tonight's slate by myself. Jake's out of town. Since I'm out next week, Jake's going to team up with Moose to do the UFC video for the August 12th slate. But again, if you're wondering when videos are posted, just subscribe to the channel. You'll get notified whenever we do. And in our Discord, we talk about when videos will be posted too. So I think we're going to have like 6-8 videos this week, in addition to the Underdog live stream. So lots of content coming.
Just putting my money where my mouth is a little bit. Brian said I want more exposure to the Ravens passing game. Odell Beckham falling about 10 spots in ADP. Nice. I'm okay with going with some game stacks here without the quarterbacks, Brian. I think those are more than okay. So Ravens, Dolphins. Looking to find a Dolphin. There is potential. There's one right here in Devin Chain. He's right here. I don't have a ton of him just yet. Are you in on him? Maybe sell me on him a little bit if you are.
Yeah, I have 15% or so above the field. Again, when we see, I think JJ Zach recently talked about this a little bit. Part of the reason we see rookies beat their ADP so often, especially in recent years, is because that median projections just can't account for the uncertainty in their situation. No one truly knows how that situation is going to play out, but they drafted this guy highly, and by all accounts, they're going to give him a decent workload despite his size. And I think if you just look at Miami running back, the position as a whole, that's a really valuable position because Mostert is getting some work in projections. Jeff Wilson is getting some work. There's the potential for Dalvin Cook to sign and get some work. That has suppressed his ADP some, and I think we see the ambiguous running back situations play out more often than not. When you have the rookie leading the way and the leading ADP guy, that's a big sign for me. So I've been drafting him, especially since, like you said, I'm trying to get a lot of these Baltimore players exposures. And if you don't end up with Tyreek or Waddle round 1 or round 2, he is the best player to pair up with them. In my opinion, it's not really close.
Talking about always going back to that comfy pair of sneakers, Brian. Had to force myself to go a different direction here, maybe buy something else and put it on my roster in Devin a chain. I typically would take someone like Jacoby Myers here, and there was some reason to take him. I have Michael Pittman on this team, so there's a correlation in week 17. There's week 15 correlation with the Chargers guys that I have, but if I always draft a team the same way, then I'm not going to have exposure to some of these other players that also have upside. A little outside of the top 100 here, but to your point, the third highest drafted Dolphin, I probably want exposure to that player. Okay. You asked me about first 10 round running back you have the least exposure to.
Yes.
And you want me to guess, right?
If you want to play the game, sure.
I always want to play games. Games are fun. Dalvin Cook.
Okay, hold on. He may not count.
Okay.
He's actually numbered. I actually didn't think I had any of them. I did draft him once recently when I was on the clock. I think it was actually on the stream we were on, and I panicked. So I do have 2% of Dalvin Cook. This guy is actually I have 1.3% of. So Dalvin Cook is tied with Kenneth Walker for me.
Interesting. So Kenneth Walker is also not the answer. I'm just getting caught up on who went here. I want to deviate for a second. How are you on Dalton Kincaid? You got a decent amount of him?
Yeah, I'm buying into the hype. I'm buying into the positional eligibility of playing the slot. 10 or 12% of teams I got. Yeah, 11% I have teams I have him on. So, yeah, I'm buying him there. For me, I find myself clicking tight ends in that range a lot, anyways. Him, Dulcich, Chig. Who else is it? Pat Fryermuth, Laporta, like guys in that 9 to 14 range I've been drafting a lot of.
Okay. I feel like maybe you've tilted your answer on the least exposed running back in the top 10 rounds to me before, based off some of the discussions we've had, both on the show and privately. And I'm going to guess Alexander Mattison from the Minnesota Vikings.
Oh, that's a good guess. Let me see here. Let me see where I have Madison. So I do have 6% Madison, but a lot of that was when he was being drafted a lot later than round 5. So it's a good guess. I've not taken Madison, I think maybe once since the big ADP move. So technically that does count. So I'll give you as a half point credit for that one.
All right. Now it has come back to me. So I need to think about building my own team a little bit. Got a 1-3-6-1 here. Chiefs wide receivers as a whole. That's one of the things on the chart that I put out. They've had a huge move. Tony down, literally every other wide receiver up. What do you think about that? There's no way that they all can be correct. That's kind of the place that my brain goes as far as that's concerned. I feel like we need to be a little more mindful of that when selecting Chiefs players. They're not all going to be worth having. I think we all want some exposure to the Chiefs in our lineups, but to see Rashee Rice, MVS, Richie James, Justin Ross, especially those two guys at the end of the draft, like it feels pretty bad to me that all of them are moving up.
Yeah, I think it's kind of that same phenomenon as the ambiguous running back situation where no one really knows how it's going to play out. And early in the offseason, it was just, all right, Tony's going to be the guy, and then probably Sky Moore, and then MBS, and then Rashee Rice might work his way in, and then Richie James and Justin Ross are complete afterthoughts. Now we get some tangible reports, and now all of these projections are just condensing. Oh, maybe Ross and James get a little more. Maybe MVS gets a little less. Tony a little less. And so they're all just condensing. So yes, some of these guys are going to be overdrafted, but I think some guys are going to be very underdrafted too. It's very unlikely that we just see this 6-man rotation all season long. I think a couple guys will emerge, and I think that's what this ADP moves have been accounting for.
Alvin Kamara announced suspended for 3 games here, Brian. One, is he the player in the top 100 you don't have or top 10 round? No, is he in the top 10 rounds? Yeah, he is.
Yeah.
Is he the player in the top 10 rounds you have the least exposure to? I'm trying to go with some nice correlation with my pick here of Kendre Miller, if that's the case.
No, I like that pick, and I have like 8% of Kamara, which as I find myself, I'm not really sure I love it. The more I think about it, he might just be washed, right? Like the per touch efficiency has basically plummeted the last couple of years. Not the best signs in the world that they signed Jamal Williams and drafted another running back. And maybe all that was just insurance around the legal situation. But I don't know, man. I mean, but again, you get Kamara round 9. How bad of a pick really is it? I don't think he's going to bottom out and completely kill you with that pick. I'm just not sure he has league winning upside with that pick either.
Looking at the dollars, and it does make sense. Looking at the dollars and cents of the decision here, I think they're on the line for about a $10 million cap hit on Kamara. Obviously, that'll be adjusted for the 3 games they don't have to pay him for. But I think there's real financial incentive for the Saints to still give him some work here. We're not talking about the Alvin Kamara from 4 or 5 years ago where he was top 5 running back, but obviously we know what the role is there as far as the passing game is concerned. I think there's still a player that can have some value where he's being drafted, but I probably will be a little less aggressive on him because I feel like I was drafting him more before the suspension news came in. I'd like to see where his ADP kind of normalizes now before I continue to fire on that, if that makes sense. I'm not sure who you're running. Obviously, we can close the thread on this conversation piece. Who is your lowest owned top 10 running back? Top 10 running back?
It is Miles Sanders.
Okay. All right.
Who I have 1% of.
What is thinking about players that should still be playing at the end of the season? Is that one of the reasons for that? Do you feel like Sanders, let's say Carolina's bad, they want to take a look at some of these other players in the roster. Is that part of it, or are you just not confident that he's good?
I'm definitely not confident that he's good at all. I mean, a lot of the big knocks on him coming out of college was his vision. The reason he has been what he has been, most of the attribution to his success is just his physical ability, but pure running back skills, both hands in the passing game and vision in the run game, is not to get too technical here. I'm just regurgitating what I hear from other film grinders. Is a reason. And like, if we're just looking at this from a high level and we're playing just the trends game, veteran running backs who change teams that are on bad teams that don't have a ton of role in the passing game in the dead zone is just like the stoneworks pick you could possibly make. So yeah, I mean, maybe he turns into this year's Josh Jacobs, although I really think that's Cam Akers, but I don't think Sanders is going to kill you this year. So let's get that, Derek. Let's get that queued up. Our social media guy, get that queued up when Sanders rushes for 1,500 yards this year.
We're about 20 picks behind. Well, hold on a second here. I was going to go with Tyler Higbee because of the ADP value, but we have the same exact situation with the tight end I should have, which is Gerald Everett.
Yes.
So Gerald Everett with Justin Herbert and Mike Williams, and now I've got 2 tight ends I feel pretty good about with Andrews and Everett on this roster.
I like that. That's a smart move. Higbee's a guy you're in on just in general, right?
Yes. Let's see if I have the confidence to do this in another tab while we're very close to being on the clock. This is a risky move here. Exposure, tight ends. Tyler Higbee is my number. I misspoke earlier because in a couple of drafts, Higbee climbed ahead of Andrews. I've got 21% Higbee. I have 21% Irv Smith, 17% Mark Andrews. Those are my highest exposed tight ends. And I think the common theme there between those 3 players, Brian, is that I'm confident in the quarterback play. I feel like they're going to have high upside in their respective offenses this year. And those are the offenses I want, particularly in the playoff weeks. Back on the clock, 1-4-7-2. I'm okay with some of the running back lottery tickets that are down here. But I also need to be a little mindful of what I'm going to be doing with a second quarterback. Don't have one just yet. I think I'm going to punt off on that and go with the running back that is on an offense I want exposure to, who I do have a decent bit of already. I'm trying to be more mindful of teams where I select Kenneth Gainwell, Brian, but I do think the Eagles offense is something you want exposure to. And after Devonta Smith and AJ Brown are gone after Swift and Penny are gone. Gainwell seems to be the one that I want the most. Goddard being kind of in that weird zone where I'm not drafting him super heavily in. Where did he go? I'm trying to find him here on the screen. Pick 81. Like, I have a hard time picking Goddard unless I have some correlative reason to do so. Maybe that's another leak in my process I have to fix. But Gainwell seems to be the Eagle player that I focus on a lot when I want one late.
Yeah, same here. And we actually got a really positive report on Gainwell. I think it was yesterday, or the day before, one of the first open practices that they were doing situational drills, and Kenneth Gainwell was their established back in the 2-minute offense. So the hurry up offense and the 2-minute offense, which has been his role the last couple of years, but there's a lot of speculation with the trade for DeAndre Swift that Swift would take over that role. But Gainwell entrenched there. That should solidify him as at least being flex worthy. Like when you're on these zero running back type teams or these hero running back type teams, you need some of these running backs late that can still provide some points in any given week. Gainwell provides that, and if there's an injury to either Rashad Penny or DeAndre Swift, now we're in a full-blown committee, 2-man committee on one of the best offenses in the league. So I think for that reason, Gainwell's one of the best picks. And honestly, Chris, that news of Gainwell should probably drop Swift a round or two in ADP, I would think.
I want to talk about running backs that go in the first 10 rounds having low exposure to. I think DeAndre Swift is technically one of my lowest because, Brian, I think I have 0% DeAndre Swift right now. That's a player that, again, I want him to prove it to me. If I lose because of DeAndre Swift this year, I'm kind of okay with that, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I think that's okay. And it's funny we're talking about exposures. I'm just looking at mine really quickly, and you mentioned your tight end strategy thus far has been get tight ends with good offenses and good quarterbacks. It's seemingly my approach is the exact opposite, as my 3 highest guys are Mike Gesicki, Greg Dulcich, and Chig Okonkwo, who undoubtedly have 3 of the worst quarterback situations in the league.
There is thankfully plenty of time to correct that if you choose to do so. I don't mind those players, though. I have I still have that open, actually. I've got Gesicki, the 6th most. So that's not too bad. I've got Chig right in the same range, about 10% of him. So it's not like we're misaligned there. I've got more leverage on quote unquote some of the better offenses at that position right now.
For sure.
All right. Love the late tight ends though. Conklin, by all reports, this is a little early for him. He's routinely available around 17, 18. Same with Jake Ferguson. That's probably why you're less invested in some of those slightly higher, slightly more expensive tight ends that I have, because these are all starters in the last 3 rounds of an underdog draft. And I feel like you can rely more on their fantasy production at the tight end position than you can at some of these. I mean, look at some of these gross players, Brian. Jalen Hyatt, John Mechie. Hope he has a great season this year coming back from cancer, but like just can't really forecast what that's going to look like in fantasy football as well as we can with these starting tight ends.
No, I agree. Totally agree. And I think we've hit on that before. Some of the best late round picks you can have that contribute to your roster are tight ends. I'm looking at, we were playing who is the lowest exposed top 10 round running back that you have. I'm looking at tight ends now. I have just 2% George Kittle. I have just 3% Evan Ingram. Are you as out on those 2 guys as I am?
George Kittle and Evan Ingram. I will have to check that out in a second here. Man, I have let this go pretty far on my backup quarterback. Justin Herbert, week 5 bye. What do I want to do here? I've got a lot of confidence that the number 2 overall pick in the draft is going to play all season long. Maybe the Texans will defy expectation a little bit here, but there's still, even at this point in the draft, plenty of backdoor stacks available with CJ Stroud as well.
Yep, exactly. I mean, you could always take Robert Woods around 17 or 18. Very easy to do.
Okay. You asked about which tight ends did you ask about again?
Kittle and Ingram.
I've got 5, just under 6% of Kittle. I have no Evan Ingram.
All right, so we're basically on the same page then. Okay.
I think part of that, just thinking about correlations, I don't have a ton of the Jaguars in general. On the few T-Law, Steezy Trev stacks that I have put together, I've got 2 Trevor Lawrence lineups in this contest right now. I've definitely gone like Kirk, Ridley, Zay Jones. Like that's kind of how I'm getting to that stack. I haven't really gotten Engram at his price because he goes right around Darren, well, a little after Darren Waller, but David Njoku. Actually, this whole range, Brian, Evan Engram, David Njoku, Pat Fryermuth, Greg Dulcich. I don't have a ton of those guys just because they're in a weird spot on the draft board.
They are. They definitely are. I mean, I do find myself taking running backs there and even some receivers. So I think it makes a lot of sense. So your last two picks here, Chris, what are you thinking about?
Thinking about my overall position distribution here looks pretty good. I want at least one more wide receiver. I do want to stack with CJ Stroud, but I'm questioning just how much I want to force that because of some of these fallers at the position. Man, this is well, here's what we're going to do. We're going to go with Robert Woods because I have, and it pains me to do this because I am very, very, very invested from like the beginning of these shows in Tank Dell as the best asset to have on this offense. I'm probably the only person in the universe taking such an aggressive Tank Dell stance other than his friends and family. But yeah. I just keep going back to this very qualitative thing that Tank Dell was a player that CJ Stroud basically demanded the Texans add to the roster. I've said that on a few shows. I feel like stuff like that, when push comes to shove, tends to matter.
I'll be very curious to see Tank Dell's playing time participation and his performance in the preseason to see, because as we'll say here, Chris, for those of you who watched preseason or followed our content on Thursday, you can gain some information for these drafts as to who's not playing, right? Like the biggest one to me was Jerome Ford not playing in that Hall of Fame game. They could have very easily played him a couple snaps, but that signifies that he clearly has that running back 2 spot locked up. You look at the Jets guys like Michael Carter, Bam Knight, they're clearly competing for running back 2 behind Breece Hall. Sat him out. So if you look for guys that are resting with the vets and the starters, that pretty much tells you that their spot is secured. And when we see guys like Anthony Schwartz or Dimitri Felton for Cleveland playing into the second half, generally a bad sign for their prospects for the upcoming season.
So we got one pick left. It's like one of the worst picks you can have in this draft, one of the last 3 picks in the draft. I don't really have much of a preference for how to approach this spot other than some of the things we've talked about an exhausting amount, correlation, just leveraging kind of the build we've already built to kind of have a good player. But there is some value in thinking about adding players that no one's really selecting. The team sneaks through to the playoff round, a player that we expect to be starting for their teams mostly at the end of the season, definitely can contribute in the fantasy playoffs, and basically will have no ownership in the contest. So it gives you a little bit more of a unique lineup. That's a long way of me explaining and then asking you what, like macro level, how do you approach round 18? Are you reaching for these off the board players at all? Or are you not really thinking that hard about an asset that's probably not going to matter?
Yeah, it's I've been mixing it up depending on how the draft goes. Sometimes I'm looking for that last correlation piece. Sometimes I just absolutely need a position. And there are some drafts where it goes pretty well and like, wow, everything fell into place. Let's take a shot on this round 18 player that no one's really drafting. So let me see if I can just find one really quickly that I have drafted recently. Amir Abdullah is a guy I drafted recently with reports that he's getting 3rd down work, mixing in with Zamir White. Not sure White should definitely be going ahead of Abdullah in the instance that Jacobs holds out the entire year. So Abdullah is a guy I recently drafted. And then there's one more guy I just drafted recently, so I can find him. I did very casually, in a very fish move, drafted Kenny McIntosh last week. So
not good news on Kenny McIntosh recently. Brian, I'm going to close out our draft today with Ty Chandler from the Minnesota Vikings. If we are skeptical on Alexander Madison's ability to have a stranglehold on that running back 1 job for the Vikings all season long, if we're skeptical that he's actually good enough to pay off at his ADP, then we should be much more interested in his backups. I definitely think it's sharp to point out Pat Curran, who won this tournament last year, has pointed out several times that there's real risk with either Chandler or Dwayne McBride, the other early down backup, that one of those guys is going to be inactive throughout the season because Kene Nwangwu is going to be the kick returner. So obviously he'll be active at the position. But I feel like Chandler is the safer bet over McBride right now if you want a backup early down running back from the Vikings.
I agree. And just really quickly, like look at those last couple of players available to you. Those are 4 or 5 guys that I have drafted and routinely draft around 16 and 17, if not around 15, with Tyquan Thornton, Chase Brown, Ty Chandler, and Miko Hardman. So to see all those guys available for your last pick is kind of interesting for this draft. I wasn't following too closely last couple of rounds, but there must have been some guys that were being drafted that typically aren't drafted.
The other set of teammates that I have been picking, or at least thinking about picking a little bit more, I have at least one share of each now at this point. So I'm only doing like 1 or 2 drafts a day right now. Deion Jackson and Evan Hull with the Indianapolis Colts, both basically free here at the end of the draft. Zach Moss, who went into training camp as the second running back, broke his arm, I believe. He's going to be out for at least a little bit in the kind of preseason portion of the season. Maybe that definitely leaks into the regular season portion of the schedule. Brian, if nothing gets resolved with Jonathan Taylor, these guys are the guys that are going to play. So we probably need to be drafting them.
Yeah, and Kenyon Drake just signed with them. I'm not convinced he's going to matter whatsoever. More of a depth move, in my opinion. I would much rather take shots on Deion Jackson, Evan Hall than Kenyon Drake, who I don't think got drafted in this draft. I'm curious to see if he starts getting picked in round 18 with this signing.
Drake has an ADP of 215.9. That means he's just barely started getting selected. So I guess we can end the show on that note. Round 18 picks that have upside still exist. As we see these teams take the field in the preseason and we gain more information based off of who's not playing and who's playing, the end of the draft board here will get significantly sharper. So your opportunity to kind of take advantage of some of these ambiguous late round situations, it is kind of quickly evaporating. So this is a really good time to get some drafts in. If you haven't started yet, which is why if you are new to Underdog, you should consider signing up using our promo code. It's on the bottom of the screen here. You'll get a 100% deposit match on your first $100. It'll give you up to $200 to start playing in some of these contests like Best Ball Mania 4 on Underdog Fantasy. This contest is filling very, very quickly now. Fill rate 55%. I think this is going up just went up while I have it up on the screen to 55.7. It's going up about 1% a day here, Brian. That's mostly why I'm trying to increase my rate of how I'm drafting some teams over the rest of this month.
Yeah, and I'm curious to see how quickly this does or doesn't fill. It is filling much faster in comparison to the DraftKings contest, but again, everyone's going to start drafting here this month, and information is going to be changing rapidly. So just be agile, be versatile, and make sure you get those deposits in and start doing these drafts.
All right, folks, thank you for joining us for this stream. For those of you watching on replay, we appreciate you as well. We will be back next week with a couple of live streams. We'll announce the schedule in our Discord. So to get notified once we schedule those on YouTube, make sure that you are subscribed to the channel and have the notifications turned on. You'll get notified when we post those. And obviously, we're going to have plenty of preseason daily fantasy content for you as well. Maybe we'll even layer in some thoughts on some of these Underdog pick'em stats that they so generously put out for preseason slates. Really one of the only providers, game operators here, giving us some of those things to consider here, which is kind of fun. Brian, I am good here. I don't know if you have anything you want to share before we end the show.
Then we hit it all, Chris. Thanks for tuning in super early. Thanks for doing this. And again, you're going to see our faces a lot over the coming months. So get used to it. And thanks for watching.